Hello and welcome to LimeTube. This is Unneeded History, the show where you learn about parts of history that you don't need to learn about. Actually, in this case, you might need to learn about the history, but the series already has a title, so I'm not going to change it now. I'm your host, Lime, and this video's topic will be the Belgian Congo. Quick disclaimer before I start. Unlike my defenestration of Prague video, and certain other videos that I will do in the future, the Belgian Congo is a very broad subject. I can't possibly go over every detail, or even a small fraction of the details, about this subject. No one perspective about this can give a complete picture, and I encourage you to do some research on your own. Also, I sometimes chose clarity and simplicity over total accuracy for some parts of this video. That being said, let's begin. How many people can you kill whilst still being a relatively obscure and unremembered figure? Odd question, I know, but just roll with it. 1,000 people? 10,000 people? 100,000 people? 1 million people? How about 13 million people? What if you also included government-mandated mutilation and torture? A person abusing and murdering millions of people for personal profit, then being mostly forgotten, seems like the plot of a dystopian novel. But such a person did exist. His name was Leopold II, King of Belgium. King Leopold ruled Belgium during the period of European colonialism, when Europeans took over most of the world in the form of colonies. At the beginning of Leopold's reign, Belgium had no major colonies, and Leopold wanted to change that. Specifically, he wanted rubber-rich colonies, because rubber was very profitable at the time. After failing to colonize the Philippines, he decided to colonize the Congo rainforest, which had large amounts of rubber, as well as minerals, wood, ivory, and exotic animals. To do this colonizing, Leopold hired a famous explorer named Henry Morton Stanley. Leopold didn't care how Stanley got this Belgian colony, only telling Stanley to get, quote, as much land as you can obtain. After landing in Africa in 1885 with part of the Belgian military, Stanley bought as much land as possible from the native leaders. Sometimes he made fair deals, but often he just pointed a gun to their heads and told them to give up their land. Because of Stanley, Leopold legally gained vast swaths of Congolese lands. By legally, I mean by the legal standards of his own time. If we were to judge by modern legal standards, Leopold would have already committed several crimes by this point, the first being armed robbery. His second crime would be the use of public office for private gain. You see, Leopold's Congolese lands, which he named the Congo Free State, belonged privately to himself. He used the Belgian National Army for personal gain. All of the Congo Free State's profits went directly to him, not to the Belgian people, and certainly not to the native Congolese people. And if that wasn't already bad enough, just wait until you hear about how he made those profits. So remember the rubber I mentioned earlier? Well, rubber is a very labor-intensive cash crop, meaning that you need to put in a lot of effort to harvest it. It was harvested through the red rubber system, which was basically slavery, but with a different name. Forced labor, beating, whipping, and lashing were all used to make the Congolese natives harvest rubber. Leopold set ridiculously large quotas for this rubber harvesting. These quotas were ambitious at best, and much of the time flat out impossible to complete. When somebody couldn't complete their quota, there was a strict punishment system for them. The first common punishment was kidnapping. If a Congolese man didn't meet his quota, the Belgian administrators took away his wife and children, who were then beaten and raped until the man did meet his quota. Remember that these quotas were often impossible to meet. The second punishment was chopping off Congolese hands. If the previous punishment wasn't enough, or if a Congolese man didn't have a wife or children, the Belgians could punish him by chopping one of his hands off. This is perhaps the most iconic example of Leopold's cruelty. Leopold encouraged this system of hand chopping because of how effective it was at making the Congolese do his labor. If you couldn't tell by this point, Leopold cared much more about rubber profits than about the welfare of the Congolese people. There's one rule that Leopold enforced that really exemplifies his attitude toward the Congo. For some background about this rule, many of Leopold's agents in the Congo shot wildlife for fun. Leopold disapproved of this practice, not because he cared about the local wildlife, but because it wasted bullets. To make sure that these bullets were being used as law enforcement instead of to hunt animals, Leopold made his agents chop off a Congolese hand for each bullet that they shot. This rule solved nothing, by the way. The agents still shot wildlife, only now they needed to chop off a random person's hand afterwards. These punishments and rules, combined with a general lack of concern for the welfare of the Congolese people, led to a massive decline in the Congolese population under Leopold's rule. Nobody is sure about the exact extent of this decline, with estimates ranging from 3 million people to the aforementioned figure of 13 million people. To top it off, Leopold's exploitation wasn't limited to the Congo. Other European empires began to use the Congo Free State as a model for running their own colonies, causing suffering all over Africa. Even those other Europeans, however, were pretty appalled by Leopold's sheer brutality. Reports and pictures from the Free State arrived in Europe, showing photographic evidence of the torture and hand-chopping that I talked about earlier. And soon there was a large movement in Europe and America protesting Leopold's control of the Congo. Side note, you know you've been doing something wrong when 19th century Europeans criticize you for mistreating Africans. By the early 20th century, Leopold was an internationally hated person, and in 1908 he was forced to give the Free State to the Belgian government, which renamed it the Belgian Congo. Leopold died a year later. The Belgian government treated the native Congolese people better than Leopold did, but that isn't saying much. Instead of pure exploitation, the Belgian government used paternalism, the idea that the so-called savage Africans are like children and should be taught and civilized by Europeans, who would act as parents to the Africans. It would be a great simile if it weren't so blatantly racist. The one upside to this idea of paternalism is that the Belgian government had to care for the native Congolese, which they did by building schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. These few achievements are overshadowed by the colony's systematic inequality, bigotry, and exploitation. Leopold's old tactics of forced labor and torture were still used, though more tamely than in Leopold's time. The ironic thing about all of this is that the Belgians colonized the Congo to civilize the savage Africans, but the Belgians were the ones who raped, beat, tortured, and mutilated the Congolese for profit. A few decades later, in the late 1950s, many of the native Congolese, after almost 75 years of suffering under colonial rule, began to revolt against the Belgians. After some fighting, the Belgian government decided to let the Congo go, and on June 30th, 1960, the Congo became fully independent and was renamed the Republic of the Congo. Sadly, violent revolutions usually don't end well, causing some serious problems for the Congo after its independence, problems that still persist today. But that's a story for another time.